Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Mosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
Today's guest is Robert Heath.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews.
Welcome to Books and Brews, episode number 61. So, Laura, what have you been doing this month?
What have we been doing? We discovered that spring is actually spring in Tennessee. Spring in Duluth was still like 3.5 feet of snow last year. I think by this time it had started to melt, but spring really doesn't get there till mid to late May if you're lucky, and possibly not till June. So, we've been outside rebuilding the garden fence that the dog destroyed, replanting the garden that the dog destroyed after the dog destroyed the garden fence, planting fruit trees. I built a chicken coop. And so you can probably see, do you go by Robert or Bob?
Bob, please.
You can see, Bob, why a sunburn totally knocked me out. I'm getting exhausted again just thinking about it. So we got chicks, and we have been feeding the Cornish cross chicks, about 3 times a day, because
Suckles are about this big right now, and they're going into freezer camp in just a couple of weeks.
And keeping in mind, when he says they're about this big, they're only 5 weeks old.
Right.
So they go from hatched to a 10-pound chicken in about 8 or 9 weeks.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yes. Not a bad way to put a very big bird in your freezer, really.
Right. Yeah. So, but in the meantime, they go through their water and their food like nobody's business. And so I'm running down 3 times a day feeding them.
So after that, though, have you been doing any reading at all lately?
Yeah, well, lucky the author whose book I pick up, because I'm outside all day, and so it takes me a while. So I'm kind of stalled right now because I'm outside working, not a reflection on the book, as I say all the time. This is an interesting book. It's called It's About Time. And the subtitle is Harmonizing Science Harmonized with Religion. And he's talking about how he can prove a lot of things that we consider faith. And so I would love to tell you more about it, but like I said, I'm stalled because I'm working about 15 hours a day. But the really interesting thing about this book is, I'll hold it up again, it's written by David W. Allen. And as I was going through, he talked about the miracle of Mary. And I thought, okay, well, he's going to talk about the Blessed Virgin Mary. I turned to the chapter, and it's a story I know. It's a story about his granddaughter, Mary, who was stuck on Mount Hood for 6 days. And it's a very dramatic story with you can only call it a miraculous rescue. Why this was so startling was because I know the author of the book. What is the book called? I have to look at my notes. Mountain Rescue, A True Story of Unexpected Mercies and Deliverance, which is written by his daughter, Shelley Allen Owen, who I stayed with at her Airbnb back in June of 2019. And that's how I know Shelley, and we got to talking about writing. So I'm going through this book, It's About Time, and I went, that's his granddaughter? Oh my gosh. I know his daughter. So it was kind of cool.
That's very.
Yeah, it was an amazing coincidence. Have you read anything?
Yes, because of some plane flights. I'm almost done with Catherine Coulter's Paradox, a very interesting thriller in the line of a Le Carré novel and, Tom Clancy and things like that. Also been doing some reading on quantum computing and the math that's associated with that as a function of some of my work. So rather than bore the audience about all that, I might say, who is our author this month?
I thought you'd never ask. Bob Heath is our author. Now, Bob Heath, I should say it is National Military Brats Day, and that is the last day of April, which is Military Brats Month. And so Bob and I are both military brats. And Bob, just give the audience a reminder, what does brats actually stand for?
Well, it's there's a lot of conversation, discussion, and argument regarding that. I think for the most part, it's just a moniker that was picked up somewhere along the line and stuck, and people kind of liked being called brats. Now there is a theory that it came after, let's see, British regiment
Attached,
right,
traveler, maybe?
traveler, yeah, like
Okay.
that. And in my book, I noted that was one theory that
Okay.
came from. However, there have been other things that I read regarding that kind of debunk that.
Mhm.
So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think that my thought about it is this: because as a military brat, right, as you are, and I am, we don't have any place we call home, really.
Right.
No, where are you from? We don't have that. And so it's kind of, if we don't really have an origination of the word term brat to name us, it fits. And I like that better.
Right. Right.
Because
So I should finish my introduction. Since you sent me a bio, Robert Heath grew up in different places around the world, beginning in Japan in the late 40s. Robert and his 8 siblings followed the assignments of their father as sergeant in the U.S. Army. He ultimately became an educator for 37 years, serving all grade levels from pre-K through doctoral programs in South and North Carolina. He now lives in the mountains of North Carolina, where he loves writing and hiking. And I do have to warn you, while I'm out there working with the rabbits, I listen to a lot of what are called creepypasta stories. So I just feel I need to warn you that the mountains are absolutely full of Bigfoot and skinwalkers, and because I know now at least 1,000 people who have died from listening to these stories. So I'm just telling you because I care. So I shouldn't listen to them because my son loves hiking, and I keep going, oh my gosh, what if any of this is true? We're ready for beer number 1.
all
I
right.
was struck in the first reading by the idea of the smitten aspect of things and how smitten both of them were for each other. And so I happened to find Bell's Smitten, a dry hopped pale ale, and which started out in their recipe as a golden rye pale ale. It has kind of earthy, rustic rye character with citrus and rosinous hops. So wonderfully bitter citrus, rosinous hop aromas, and earthy overtones. It doesn't leave a lot of room for you to wonder if you'll love it. So I thought, when people are smitten with each other, it doesn't leave a lot of room
Okay.
for anything else.
An excellent name pairing. And
Well done. Well
we just a heads up, we were not able to actually find some of these beers, or in fact any of them, but it's still fun to talk about them and why we chose them for the reading. So go ahead with reading number 1, Bob.
All right, I sure will. So mom and dad both grew up in the Depression. Dad had 8 siblings and mom had just 1. They were both working in Ottawa, Illinois when they first met. Dick always had a knack for fixing things, including an almost natural ability to repair automobiles. In early February of 1941, at the age of 21, Dick was working at Gray Warner's service station on West Norris Drive in Ottawa, Illinois. One day around lunchtime, he went across the street to the cafe for a bite to eat and sat at the counter a few seats down from another gentleman. Dick wasn't known to be shy, and when a beautiful waitress came over to take his order, he said, "Would you like to go out on a date with me?" The waitress seemed a little befuddled and glanced at the other man sitting at the counter. The gentleman looked over at Dick and said, "Son, that lady is my wife. We do have a daughter who is about your and she might be interested in going on a date with you." With that said, he wrote down Jenny's phone number and gave it to Dick. Jenny, age 19, was living with her parents and working for a Swedish masseuse in Ottawa at the time. Dick wasted no time contacting her, and soon they were seeing each other. Many of their early times together involved roller skating around town, and they would occasionally go to a movie or get something to eat. Like her mother, Jenny was a beautiful young lady, and Dick was totally smitten. After Dick and Jenny had been seeing each other for 3 or 4 months, Jenny and her family went on vacation through the month of June with several of their extended family and friends at a cabin her father had built near Wisconsin Rapids. The couple communicated frequently by letter throughout that month. All Dick's letters let Jenny know he was crazy about her and was hoping she felt the same. Jenny came back to Ottawa around the 1st of July, and on the 4th of July, Dick proposed. After their betrothal, Dick and Jenny had only July together before they were again separated, as Dick had been drafted into the Army and had to report to Camp Grant Reception Center in South Rockford, Illinois, for basic training at the beginning of August of 1941. As a note, Jenny began going to one-room schoolhouse teacher college. When the spring semester ended in early June of 1942, Jenny went to Tomah, Wisconsin to be with her parents and took on a housekeeping job. Not long after that, Dick called from Fort Crook to propose a wedding date. Knowing that Jenny planned to continue her schooling to be a teacher, he said, "I think we should get married soon, and I know you plan to keep going to school to be a teacher. If you'll quit school and marry me, I'll provide you with your own kindergarten." Believe it or not, Jenny bought that line, and on July 16th, she was on her way to Omaha to get married.
I love that last line. That's so perfect. It kind of reminded me, and I thought about this earlier. I wanted to look it up and then I didn't. But there is a story in Scotland, in medieval Scotland, of a man who wooed his bride by promising her, if you marry me, you will be buried in the most beautiful cemetery in the world. And apparently it worked. And that is, if anyone happens to be going to Scotland, look for the McNab Cemetery.
Okay.
And I think, if I remember, it's on kind of almost a little island in the middle of the stream. So I thought of that. I have to ask, how shocked was Ginny's mother to have someone young enough to be her son ask her out on a date?
Well, I think when she kind of passed it on to her husband, who just happened to be sitting there, and then he started dating Jenny, I think she just went on. As far as I know, I've never heard anything one way or the other about that.
I would have thought that was a huge family story. You asked my mother out.
I would have thought the dad would have slugged him.
Instead,
The last opportunity would have been to date his daughter.
Right. That's what shocked me. And what about Ginny? Like, this is the 1940s. Dad, you just gave my number to a complete stranger? How did she react to that?
well, didn't they all want to marry off their daughters? Back
That's
in
the thing.
I guess I haven't looked at it that way. So I do love that ending about you'll have your own kindergarten. I have to ask you, since I also have 9 children and you're one of 9, what is your favorite part of growing up in such a big family?
My favorite part of that is how we are today. We gather at least twice a year, Thanksgiving and around Mom's birthday. As a matter of fact, we're going down tomorrow to have a gathering, and all but one of the siblings and families will be there.
Very nice.
You will never hear an argument. You'll never hear fussing. All you hear is a bunch of raucous laughter. Doesn't matter what we're doing. Even if we're working, we would have family work days at Mom's house around her birthday. And we would be building things, fixing things, cementing things, and just laughing like crazy, just having fun, but getting it done. And it's just and it's always been that way, even when we were kids.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. I like the part in your acknowledgments at the front of the book where you say we started talking about all these stories that we thought she didn't know anything about. And I really laughed at that too, because my kids have a few of those stories. Like My first husband, his wedding ring disappeared and it was gone for a year. And I was rather upset with him. Like today I'd take things more in stride, but still, it's a wedding ring. I'm like, how do you lose a wedding ring? And it was missing for a whole year. And I don't remember if he found it. Oh, yeah, he found it one day. And so about 10 years later, my daughter's getting ready to go off to college. And she goes, Mom, when Dad's wedding ring was missing? I said, yeah. She said, well, we thought it was the one true ring. So we took it and we didn't have a volcano, so we threw it behind the stove.
Oh, God.
And my kids over the years have told me a lot of stories of things I didn't know. But tell our audience how that led to this book.
Yeah, so as I said, we gather at Thanksgiving, and we've done that every year for like 50 some odd years, ever since Dad and Mom Dad retired from the Army, and they put a place out, a double wide trailer out on Lake Murray in South Carolina, and that's where they live for the remainder of their lives. And we would gather there every year for Thanksgiving. And one year we were just outside, and one of us told a story, and we were all just laughing our tails off.
Yeah.
And then another one told a story, and then another one, then another one, and another one. And I'm listening to all this, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is too good. And so we decided at that time that with Mom's 80th birthday coming up the following May, we would all bring the craziest story we could remember, tell that story to Mom, and see how she reacted to it. And we did. And that was the beginning of this book.
Yeah, it's full of great stories.
Thank you. And she just sat there as we told these stories, shaking her head, saying, I should have been paying more attention. I mean, we're talking about Japan and Taiwan and Germany and, around the U.S.
Right. This book has a lot of military history. It's not just family stories. And I was kind of curious, who would you especially recommend this book for? Like for historians, for people just interested in family stories?
Well, it is a family memoir, and it's an historical family memoir. And so I will say this, all of my siblings have a copy. I was able to put a copy in Mom's hand on her 100th birthday.
Wow.
Yes. And
she's over 100?
Well, she's not with us anymore. She passed 3 weeks later.
Okay.
But it had been my goal to put it in her hand. But I had been feeding her these chapters as I got them completed all along, just to get her thoughts and all that. But ask me the question again.
Who would you recommend this book to?
Okay, yes, thank you. Yes,
I was curious if it was a book that you feel even just historians or military historians would love.
Well, I think it can have a broader audience than that. I think, for one thing, with our military today being well thought of by our society, generally speaking, a lot of people would enjoy it because it's about a lot of adventures. It is about the history of our country in many ways. I got into the history, thinking about, there we were in Japan, Mom and Dad and my 2 older siblings, 1.5 years after we dropped 2 atom bombs.
Right.
And that was after we had bombed it half to death for several years. So the historical parts of it, to me, were incredibly interesting, especially considering we were in those places very close to those historical times. And so the Berlin Wall was built 1 month after we landed in Bamberg, Germany. And, all those duck and cover drills and all that stuff we went through.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of that. So I think anybody who has an interest in history, especially as it's related to a family of people who were following their dad around in the Army, would find it interesting. I would think that. And now I have several of my friends have copies of the book and have read it, and most of them are not military brats. Most of them really enjoyed it. A few of them didn't.
Well, They have no taste.
That's right.
One thing I found really interesting that comes up several times in your book is that at various schools, various of the kids in your family were bullied. And you kind of make the comment that it didn't really bother you much. Am I kind of getting that right?
I think for a majority of us, it was just something we dealt with and blew it off.
Mhm.
I think there's one.
Why I found that comment so interesting was because my experiences, I'd say, were similar. And so I can remember one, I was in sixth grade. No, I was probably in fourth or fifth grade. And this older boy who was probably sixth grade, for some reason, took an apparent disliking to me. And every day when we were walking home, he'd go, "There's Frankenstein." And well, I knew that Frankenstein was the doctor, not the monster. So I would just say, "And there's the monster he built." And the poor
That's
kid
great.
never understood what I was saying. He's always like, "Why are you saying that?" Why? I'm like, "Read the book." But, and then Jeff,
Read the book if you can read, stupid.
Yeah.
right. And then Jeff Stewart Elementary, a school you will never find in the North. My first experience with racism was a little girl calling me a cracker when I was in third grade. And I laughed. I thought it was the funniest thing. Like, why would you call me that? I knew it was supposed to be an insult, but I just laughed at her and she never called me a name again. But
Yeah.
I found it very striking that your experience was so similar. And I wondered, do you think that there is a reason, is this common to military brats, that bullying is just like, okay, so what are you doing?
Well, I'll say that the majority of our bullying was in the States when we were basically living on the economy, going to public schools. And there were a lot of local kids around, and we didn't speak their language, or they knew we were military brats, and they didn't, they knew we'd be here and gone, and that kind of thing. And it's just one of those adaptive things that I think military kids gather within themselves. Things are different, everything's different wherever you go, and so you just don't let things rub you the wrong way. And I think for the most part, military parents are kind of like that too. My dad never, got all bent out of shape with things. And it was almost like with my dad, the worse the situation was, the calmer he was. And in talking with my siblings about that, we have all kind of discovered that within ourselves as we have, matured, which is very interesting. And I think that's a big part of what you're talking about is not letting other people put us down and care.
Yeah. We have to go on to beer number 2.
And what I have, and what I was, very interested and thrilled about this reading was this little girl being thrown into the air on the wonderful rope and all of that. So I found, I just thought that was just the neatest image. And I found this tire swing, hazy pale ale, to go with this. And
No
it's
kidding. I've got to find that one.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
That's
from
my
Masthead Brewing, if you want to find that.
What-
It's
what
a
brewery?
hoppy American wheat. I'm sorry, say again?
Which brewer was it?
Masthead. So
Masthead.
like kind of shit, Masthead Brewing.
Masthead.
Yes, it's perfect for spring. It's bursting with notes of citrus and stone fruit, and the beer has just enough bitterness, hop flavor, and aroma to keep it quaffable. So I found some tasting notes, which I thought were kind of interesting because some people had said that there are some notes of pineapple, tangerine, and toasty, biscuity caramel malt. So, imagine after a day of swinging on the rope, you got a nice, shake down at the drugstore with a toasty, biscuity caramel malt. Anyway, I just thought that was pretty good.
What was the name of the beer?
Tire swing.
Tire swing, hazy pale ale.
Tires?
Yeah. I'll send
That
you a
is-
list of all of these too.
Yes, I can send you links.
My
Yeah,
sister
so we're
just
ready
went-
for we're ready for reading number 3.
Two.
Okay,
Oh,
so
sorry, I'm ahead of myself.
number 2, right?
Yeah, number two.
Okay, so Dad fought in World War II, was stationed in North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, then France. He was notified of the birth of his first son while in Sardinia, was later wounded in France, and came home and was honorably discharged from the Army. After trying civilian life for a year and a half, he reenlisted in the Army. Meanwhile, brat number two came along. Dad's first deployment was to Yokohama, Japan, and that's where brat number three came along, me. After 3 years, we came back to the States, Newport News, Virginia. While there, Dad got sent to Turkey for a year, and we couldn't go. After Dad came back, he got assigned to the ROTC at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, where we were for 3 years. The next stop was Taiwan. Over the course of that time, brats 4, 5, and 6 arrived. This story happened while we were staying on a farm with our grandparents, waiting for our port of call for Taiwan. And this was Glamich, who was our grandma, and Grandpa Archie. This farm had a huge, wonderful oak tree with long, thick limbs protruding from the trunk, just begging us to climb it. The lowest, really large limb had a single strand of a stout rope tied to it. That limb looked like it was 100 feet high to us. It was decided that it would be good if someone stood where the rope reached the ground and held it at about chest height, and then the rest of us would grab the end of the rope and run with it until it reached full extension, snapping the slack out of the line and launching the rider into the air. Dan, being the oldest and biggest, was convinced he should be the first to try, especially since he came up with the idea. He grabbed the rope and stood in front of us while we, Dave, Bob, Mike, and Rachel, grabbed the long end and took off running. Well, Dan outweighed the smallest three of us, who were pulling the end of the rope with Dave, and even though we were able to get him off the ground, he didn't go high enough to feel any thrill. So Dan joined the run and snap the rope team, and Dave took his turn hanging on to it. Again, not much of a snap. So then it was my turn, followed by Mike. Still no great results. Then there was little tiny, barely 4-year-old Rachel. She was really excited and eager to get her turn to do what her big brothers just did. Well, she grabbed hold of that rope, and all 4 boys took off running. With the other end, that rope went taut and snapped. It was like Rachel flew to the top of the tree, squealing in delight the whole way. Wow. She went so high on the end of that rope that she looked like a little rag doll when she reached the top of her flight. All the boys thought it was great. Rachel kept yelling, "Do it again and again and again." We were having a whole lot of fun snapping the rope and watching our little sister fly way up in the air, squealing and screaming in delight. It was like we had engineered the perfect Disney World ride and had the happiest customer in the whole world. This was all really great, right up until Glamich heard the squealing and laughing and came out to see what was going on, and nearly had a heart attack from fright when she saw the only daughter in the family flying through the air toward the limbs above her, while all the boy brats were totally engrossed in the delirious abandonment of the moment. Needless to say, Glamich very loudly, quickly, and firmly put an end to that fun. To this day, every member of the Heath platoon who was involved remembers how much fun that was at the time and shakes his or her head at how crazy it was and expresses their thanks that Rachel survived.
I loved your line about that being the best ride at Disney with the best customer. That just was so illustrative. I loved it.
Yeah. And it just, again, because I have a family similar, I have 7 boys and 2 girls.
Oh boy.
So now we have 3 because Chris has a daughter.
I put her into double digits.
Yeah. But we have similar dynamics. So I could totally relate to this because every single time I went to the ER, it was either something the boys did to themselves or something the boys did to the girls.
Every time one of us went to the ER, it was Jim. One brother.
Really?
He got more stitches and broken bones than all the rest of us put together.
Now, my boys were a little more equal opportunity, but like when my daughter broke her arm, she was 2, if you can believe it, my older daughter. Goodness. And my oldest son, they had a pillow fight, and he managed to break her arm in a pillow fight when he was 4. And And then another time she was in ER was her younger brother. We were trying to buy a car, and I kept running out to check on them. And all of a sudden we heard this crash, and they had been sitting around this glass top table. And my son, who was 18 months, and keep in mind, I'm like 9.5 months pregnant that particular day.
Oh,
And then there were three around the table, and the youngest of those three was 18 months. He decided to dance on the glass top table. He went through, and her hair was just all full of glass, and that all had to be vacuumed out. He was in much worse shape. He had to be stitched up, and they said the baby fat saved him, but that was quite an event. And the poor EMTs came in the ambulance, and first they looked at just blood everywhere, and then I came out like 9.5 months pregnant, me and the baby covered in blood, and they're just like, "You're not going into labor, are you?" So I would love to have had the chance to trade ER war stories with your mother.
Oh, yeah.
So how did Rachel like being the only girl?
Well, most of the time when I say that she's the only girl in the family, people say, "Oh, poor girl." And my immediate response is anything but poor girl. She was right in the middle. So she was little princess
Mhm.
and she was little mama all at the same time. And she loved both roles.
Yep.
So the other part of it is, who do you think was the only one who ever had her own room? Rachel.
You got it.
Except when there was a newborn, and the newborn was in Rachel's room, which Rachel loved as much as anything else. So she had it all, and she had full protection from the Sarge, right? Okay, you don't mess with your sister. You mess with your sister, you get in the belt. We knew that. We didn't. So she played with us, did what we did. If we were off on an adventure, Rachel, when she was old enough, was right there with us, and so I think for her, it was good. Now, when she started dating, nobody ever knew who she was dating, ever, until
protect them from the brothers. See, my daughter is kind of the opposite. I'm not sure her brothers are going to know who she's dating, but if she was riding the bus home from work or whatever, and if guys would hit on her, she would always just say, "My father's a security officer and I have 7 brothers." And they would shape up like that. Nobody would try anything with her. So she ended up, and she's funny because when she was little, all she ever wanted was another sister in addition to her older sister.
Yeah.
To the point that when we found out I was pregnant with twins, she's like, "There's got to be a girl in there somewhere." Nope.
And
the day I came home from the ultrasound said, "It's 2 boys." She was burst into tears. She was 5, but she ended up really liking it, and she gets such a kick out of telling people she has 7 brothers.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I wanted to go back to, you had started to talk about Japan and how you ended up there just 2 years after Hiroshima, Nagasaki. You go into that, and obviously the Americans and the Japanese didn't necessarily have any good feelings toward each other right after the war. But I read a book that I've brought up a few times on this program. It's called God's Samurai by Mitsuo Fuchida. And he was the lead pilot in the attack on Pearl Harbor. And because of events in his life, meeting Americans, meeting Christians, finding out that the Japanese were actually treated reasonably well in American camps and many other things, he actually started giving talks in America about his conversion, and he was amazed at how warmly he was welcomed and accepted here. And it sounds like you did okay in Japan too. So how do you account for that, what should be antagonism being overcome relatively quickly?
Absolutely. Well, General MacArthur and his head aide, a lieutenant general, who was a Japanese culture expert, determined that Emperor Hirohito should not be treated as a war criminal because he was believed to be a god by the Japanese people. And that was a very strong belief in that culture. And they enlisted Emperor Hirohito to get on the radio and tell the people that the Allied troops were not here to harm them. They were here to help them and to be good and helpful. And that is how it all played out. I asked Mom, how were they towards you when you were there? I mean, when we left, I was 1 year old, so I don't remember.
Yeah.
But she said they were always helpful and gracious and kind, always. She never experienced anything other than that. And that was a direct result of enlisting Emperor Hirohito, their god, to tell them what to do and how to do it. Had they done it another way, had they taken him to trial and charged him with war crimes and that kind of thing, there likely would have been bloodshed and revolt. They took the opposite course and it paid off well.
And it makes me think of Abraham Lincoln in the aftermath of the Civil War saying, we're not going to be enemies. We are going to, treat the people of the South with kindness and love and forgiveness.
That is an excellent comparison. Yes.
You spent a lot of time overseas, probably more than many military brats. What kind of culture shock did you experience in coming back to the States?
Oh, well, okay. I was wondering if that's where you were going to go or not. Coming back to the States in 1964, 1 month after the Civil Rights Act was passed, to South Carolina was a culture shock. Going to Taiwan never felt like a culture shock.
Really?
Going to Germany didn't feel like a culture shock. It was just difference. Coming to South Carolina was a culture shock for us. When we jumped out of the car driving into South Carolina, when Dad stopped to get some gas, he told us all to go to the bathroom. And we ran up to the bathroom door, and there's that sign on the door that said, white only. We were aghast. We had no clue what that meant. We went right back to the car. There's a sign. It says white only. We don't know what that means. Go to the bathroom. We'll tell you about it later. And they did. Still didn't understand. White only? What?
Yeah.
I mean, really and truly. And we had some changes to learn about. And most of us got off, or many of us got off the boat in South Carolina. And yeah.
See, that's interesting. And I wonder what would have been different if you had gone to the north, because when we came back from Germany, we went to Illinois. And it was a few years later too. There was nothing like that. But for me, the culture shock, there was some coming from Germany, which was the only place I had ever remembered, and coming to the United States. But there was also culture shock going from the north to the south when we were stationed in Biloxi, Mississippi in particular. Because, it really wasn't an issue in the north, but when we moved to the south, my parents did have a little bit of a talk with us about you might see and hear some things here that you're not used to.
Yeah, exactly. And some of my siblings did, and I heard a little bit of it, but honestly, the three guys that I hooked up with in my senior year in high school, and that was also my second high school in South Carolina. So they put us in Catholic school the first year, just in case there was, stuff going on with racial stuff and all, but nobody had integrated after the Civil Rights Act to begin with. So I hooked up with these three guys who had gone to school their whole lives together. Two of them grew up on a farm. And I can tell you, I never heard any of those three guys ever say anything racial. And as I grew older, and I think back on that, it was very surprising to me that I didn't, because that was the culture they grew up in.
Right.
And so I was a very fortunate person in that regard, in who my friends were.
Right.
The other had to just kind of adapt and learn how to deal with it and that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah. It's a very interesting experience. We're ready for beer number 3.
And this one I think is my favorite. from the
Okay.
standpoint of the fact that it tells a story. And the interesting thing is I don't believe you're going to be able to find it anywhere in this country. It is from the Great Leap Brewing Company, which is headquartered in Beijing. And they've been trying to take the world by storm with a number of different beers. And this one, I was so taken by this aspect of this general sitting on or whatever he was, sitting on his chair in the jungle. And I thought, this needs to be its own movie, practically. And so
Yeah.
I found this beer called the Hidden General IPA from Great Leap Brewing in Beijing. And you might go, oh, Hidden General, is that kind of a story unto itself? It's actually named after the legend of Hua Mulan, a rare female military hero in Chinese history. Her story is part myth and part oral history, but her impact on gender roles, particularly in China, has been, immeasurable. So this is a full-bodied session IPA. It is the lightest IPA on the Great Leap menu, and they have like 40 or 50 beers that they've made. So the Hidden General IPA, perhaps like General Mulan, is as deceptive as its inspiration, and perhaps like the general or the officer in the story as well. It's full-bodied and flavorful, infused a mildly bittered IPA with a blend of Taiwanese roasted oolong tea and dried chrysanthemum flowers to highlight the floral aromas of the hops. So I'm dying to try this beer, and I just thought it was a
This
neat
beer in
counterpoint to your
Taiwan
story.
or
So
It's from China.
the beer's from China, but they used
Really?
Taiwanese oolong tea, which I thought was interesting as well
Yeah.
because of the difference between the nationalist Chinese, and Chiang Kai-Shek in all of that. So,
Oh, you gave it away.
well, I have an interesting little anecdote to throw on that. One of the people I worked for in my supercomputing history, Dr. Steve Chen, was originally from Taiwan, but we ate dinner at a restaurant once in Oregon when I worked for Sequent Computing Systems. He was the chief technology officer there, and the chef of this Chinese restaurant was the former personal chef to Chiang Kai-Shek. And I thought that was just one of the neatest
You are
things
kidding
that
me.
I had heard,
So I'm feeling like the odd man out. Absolutely no connection within 6 degrees to Chiang Kai-Shek. I can barely even say his name for some reason.
I have to share this real quickly before I know you want
Okay.
to read, right? So Nancy just sold a house that she owned to the person who lived across the street, who was an Oriental lady. And I was talking to her and asked her country of origin. It was Taiwan. And so we were talking, and I was telling her where we lived in Taiwan. And she said, "Oh, I grew up 10 minutes from there. If
Oh,
you
wow.
or any of your family want to go, I'll be your tour guide." How cool would that
Neat. That's fantastic.
be?
Reading number 3.
All right, and here we go. We're in Taiwan, where brats 7 and 8 joined the Heath brat platoon. In Taiwan, like everywhere we lived, we ran wild and free. Here's one of many stories. I was 8 years old, and my brother Mike was 6. One day, we strapped on our cap pistols, loaded them up with fresh rolls of caps, and fired off a few rounds to make sure they worked. We holstered our pistols, climbed over the shard-topped wall, and dropped down into the tree grove on the other side. Then we started running through the woods in a completely unscripted, shrieking, ruleless game of blasting away with our cap pistols, playing cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers, soldiers in the great battle, or anything the game evolved into from moment to moment. Our cap pistols were kapowing all over the place with little puffs of smoke curling up with each pop. We occasionally stopped and argued whether one of us had been fatally shot by the other. Nobody ever won those arguments. Even at that, we may have killed each other a few times, but we always managed to resurrect ourselves so that we could continue the mock bloodshed. I really don't know how long we ran around in that grove of fruit trees, but it doesn't seem that it was very long. Suddenly, we both stopped running. It wasn't just me and Mike in the thickly shaded tree grove. It was Mike, me, and a bunch of Chinese soldiers. And these guys had real guns. We stood there for what seemed like a very long time looking at the soldiers. They stood there looking at us and talking to one another. 2 of the soldiers walked over to us and took our cap pistols, then herded us toward what seemed to be the center of the tree grove, prattling back and forth in their fast-paced language the whole way. There, on a porch in front of a thatched hut on a big chair, maybe it was throne, sat a bald man in a Chinese army uniform. I mean, the throne wasn't gold gilded or anything, it was just a big wooden, ornately carved chair. Mike and I stood there looking at the bald soldier in the chair. He was clearly the lead soldier. The men talked to the bald soldier, occasionally pointing at us and the cat pistols. Then the soldier took our cat pistols, handed them over to the throne soldier. He looked them over carefully, pointed one in the air, and pulled the trigger a couple times, letting loose 2 puffs of smoke. He laughed, and all the other soldiers laughed too. Mike and I didn't laugh. I looked over at Mike. I was about to pee my pants, clueless but highly fearful as to our future here with these Chinese soldiers. Mike didn't look worried. Mike never worried about anything. Suddenly, the chief soldier said something to the two of the others and handed them our pistols, gesturing for them to go. These 2 soldiers took us through the tree grove and back to our wall. They gave us back our pistols, then disappeared back through the trees. We scampered over the wall and ran back to the house. I don't really know what I did the rest of that day. I know neither Mike nor I mentioned it or talked about it. Well, this little adventure name never came up again until Mom's 80th birthday party in 2002, some 47 years later. We had all conspired to tell a tale of growing up, and this is the story I told. Mike didn't remember a thing about the Chinese soldiers. When I finished telling the story, I said, I don't have any idea who those soldiers were, who the man in the big chair was, or why they detained us. Mom said, that was probably Chiang Kai-Shek. His compound was right next to us. Mike and I were briefly captives of Chiang Kai-Shek, leader of the Republic of China in 1956. Mom just kept shaking her head and repeating, I should have been paying more attention, as we all told our stories.
That has to be one of the best stories I've ever heard.
That is probably the story I tell the most.
Right. I can see why that deserves to be told the most. What did you know about the Chinese soldiers at the time? Were you afraid of them before this, or were they just okay?
We knew nothing about the history of what was going on. You know, there was one time there were a bunch of soldiers then at the entrance to our housing area. We had no clue why we were there. We were just down there, you know, with our slingshots shooting, you know, pop crackers at them.
Yeah.
Which they shot back at us. And I mean, it was crazy that it was like we feared nothing and got away with it. I don't know how I mean, we all survived.
Well, when you're kids, you know, you don't fear anything because you don't know enough to be afraid a lot of times.
Right.
I was interested, and again, kind of comparing experiences, how you talked about being completely unaware of the tensions. And that was my experience. I'm embarrassed to say how old I was when it suddenly dawned on me, oh, that's why we were in Germany. You know, I knew we weren't in our own country. And I mean, to be fair, I was not even 6 when we left. I was short of my 6th birthday. You know, but I didn't remember until my neighbor, who was a year younger than me, showed up at my college. And she said, you don't remember the blackout drills and the go bags we had to have? You know, but as a kid, you just accept everything. And, you know, by contrast, I used to talk with my kids a lot about history, about politics. And I was kind of curious, you know, is this just some parents do and some don't? Or do you think it's particularly to military parents that they don't scare the kids about why we're here?
I'm not really certain why. And I wish I had been able to talk a little more with Dad and Mom about this, but they never shared anything about what was going on politically around us wherever we were. It was just we were there and that was that. And you know, I don't know. I think you know, of course I was a history major in college and all that. And certainly my kids would have heard what was going on and all of that. You know, when all those soldiers were down at the entry to our thing, they probably would have heard about the American embassy in Taipei being overrun by the citizens because an American soldier had shot a Taiwanese guy who was looking through his bathroom window at his wife taking a shower. you know, and
Well, you shouldn't be doing that.
but we didn't know any of that. We had
Right.
none of,
Right.
and I mean, we heard about the Berlin Wall, and occasionally when we were in Germany, and occasionally a priest would bring some refugees who had gotten across the Rhine River, you know,
Mhm.
to the western part of Berlin and into Germany. But beyond that, you know, and ducking and covering because there might be an atomic bomb dropped on us, and
Right.
being told don't look at the window if there's a bright flash, then I'm thinking in my head, if there's a bright flash, will it really matter?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's been the joke for
But yeah,
decades. Like,
but
is a desk really going to protect you from an atomic bomb? I don't think so.
See, I found just simply as a former little boy that this was a little boy's fever dream of the stories. You know, that it didn't matter any of that other political situation to be treated as an equal insurgent. You know, with the army that was in the bush. I just thought was the best story I've ever heard.
Yeah.
you very
So
much.
that story is right up there with one of our former guests, Sandy Hanna, who wrote The Ignorance of Bliss, An American Kid in Saigon. And this ties into my next question. You talk about how you just ran wild and free. So Sandy Hanna was the second of four. She is the second of four. They happened to be in Saigon. Yeah, it must have been Saigon
Oh wow.
in 1963. And so I think she was maybe around 10 or 12 at the time. And she and her three siblings had an inadvertent front row seat to the Vietnamese coup of 1963. So that's the only story that rivals yours. But, you know, in part it's because she could just run free. They weren't really necessarily watched that well. And that was my experience too. And, you know, how much do you think this has to do with the fact that it was the 60s and 70s versus do military parents just kind of let their kids run free?
Feral.
Feral children.
Well, I can tell you as a school principal, I knew many a helicopter mom,
Mhm.
and then that evolved into lawnmower moms. I don't know if you know that term or not.
I do not.
Lawnmower moms mow down all things that get in the way of their kids doing what they want to do.
Okay.
Helicopter moms are just hovering over all that.
Right.
But I mean, our mom, I mean, you got 9 kids. How are you going to helicopter over all them?
Yep.
You know,
You know what? And I've
But
often said,
a different era too.
no.
Well, with a Gao 1950 caliber machine gun, you know, on the pods of that helicopter, I think you could do a fair job managing almost anything.
Yeah, I just, you know, what I wondered as I was thinking about that, was it in part that, well, you know, we often lived on bases which have armed guards. Of course, you're going to let your kids run free. But on the other hand, we ran free in the suburbs too, because normally we didn't live on base, only in Germany. So I thought maybe it's, you know, more product of the time. But then again, I think there's a certain sense of adventure to people who will join the military and take kids all over the world.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
maybe there is a different mindset.
Yeah, there are. And people ask me if being a military brat, if we were well behaved.
Mhm.
And I say that depends on who was standing nearby. If the sergeant
Yeah.
was standing nearby, you bet your booty we were well behaved because
Mhm.
he wasn't afraid to use it, and we knew it. But if he
Yeah.
wasn't around, we were adventurous. That's what we were.
Excellent word.
And I think most military brats can agree with that to a pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are at the end of our interview already. Where can people find you online?
Okay, so I can be found on Facebook at Robert Heath Author Facebook page. Okay, and you can email me at bratbob3of9 @gmail.com. If
Very
you
good.
want any information or share anything or anything like that, would be great.
Okay.
And Laura, where can we find you and Michael online?
Michael and I, my normal co-host,
As opposed to the abnormal one.
abnormal co-host, are at Books and Brews. And so we have an Instagram page, which is Book and Brews.
Okay.
And we have a Facebook page, which is Books and Brews with Laura Bosica and michaelagnew.com. And if we have anything else, I don't remember because I don't use it. I am
I
at,
also have an Instagram page,
oh, do you? Okay, what is it?
but I never go there.
Oh,
When I post something on my Facebook author page, it automatically posts it on Instagram. In
yeah,
occasion-
that's how I have mine set up. So I am at laurabosica.com or bluebellschronicles.com. I have an author page at Facebook, laura.bosica.author. I don't really do Twitter except under my publishing company, Gabriel Sworn Books, BKS.
Yeah, Wordsmiths and a Wolfhound.
We do. And we on YouTube, yeah. Yeah. So we together are Wordsmiths and a Wolfhound on YouTube. And do you have any upcoming events?
Well, I just had 2 events this past week.
Oh,
And-
shoot.
And so tomorrow we have a family gathering down in Columbia, South Carolina. So I did a book talk last Monday, and that was down in Rock Hill, South Carolina, where my publisher is located down there. And that was a lot of fun. There were a lot of military brats in the group.
I bet they enjoyed that.
And oh yeah, it was just the conversation was really good, and it was just I had a great time doing that.
Mhm.
And then let's see, Saturday I was down in Columbia, and there was a Columbia Brat Bash there going on, and so I was down there, and they had vendors, including me. And
Okay. A brat bash.
yeah, Brat Bash.
Oh. We'll have to keep an eye out for that next year.
Yeah. And I saw online on Facebook, there was it looked like a really big Brat Bash out in Colorado Springs. Just
Have
this
to look
past-
that up.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of going on out there, obviously, with the Air Force Academy and
Oh, yeah.
Peterson Air Force Base, and a bunch of other things going around out there. Schriever, Cheyenne Mountain, a bunch of stuff out there.
Oh yeah.
Well, my upcoming events will be at Morristown Farmers Market in Morristown, Tennessee. I think the dates are, they're 2 Fridays, May 7th and June 7th, which doesn't add up, but I think the first 2 Fridays in May and June
Well,
at 5 o'clock.
what do you do at a farmer's market?
Well, I sell books, but we also
Okay.
have some, we're starting to add some farm products. So right now we're selling rabbit pellet manure. Yes.
And eggs.
Fertilizer, sorry, rabbit pellet fertilizer. It is manure, but it sounds better to call it fertilizer. And that is its intended purpose.
Scientifically designed. to
Yeah,
accomplish
it's
its objective.
very excellent fertilizer. So, and then my publishing company, Gabriel Sworn Press, is accepting submissions for our new anthologies, one on music and one on faith,
Poetry anthology.
poetry anthologies.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And I would like to tout my publisher as well. That's Warren Publishing.
Okay,
They are based in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I was a middle school principal in Rock Hill for 8 years. So
okay,
going back there's in a way kind of like going back home a little bit for me.
right.
Still have
Yeah.
teachers who teach there, even though I haven't been there in 15 years. But it's kind of neat, and they are great to work with. They're a hybrid publishing company.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what Gabriel Sworn is.
Yeah.
And so, Laura, welcome next month.
I say this every month, and every month it's true.
Which is what?
I am excited to talk to Sharon Bennett Connolly. She is a big name in more medieval, I think a little newer history than that, but also as far back as medieval history. Sharon has been fascinated by history for over 40 years and was recently elected as a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society in recognition of her contribution to historical scholarship. She has studied history academically and just for fun, and even worked as a tour guide at historical sites, which is like my dream job.
Oh, that's
One
cool.
Christmas, her husband gave her a blog, and she hasn't looked back. The blog has given her the chance to share the history she loves, both the stories themselves and the places they happened. In 2017, she completed her first nonfiction book, Heroines of the Medieval World. And I believe by the time we finish this interview, I will have her book, what is it called? Women of Anarchy, I think, will be in my email. So I'm looking forward to reading that. So thank you very much for being on our program,
Thank you.
Robert.
Very enjoyable.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And may you recover.